The Colossus of Rhodes is remembered as one of the most powerful symbols ever created, but almost nobody talks about the most uncomfortable part of its story. It collapsed almost immediately. 54 years is nothing in historical time. That is not endurance, that is a blink. And yet this statue has survived in memory for more than 2,000 years, which should already tell you that something strange is going on. When something fails this fast but becomes immortal anyway, the failure is not a flaw in the story, it is the story. This episode of History of Questions starts with that contradiction, because the Colossus wasn't destroyed by enemies, neglect, or decay. It was defeated by the gap between confidence and understanding. And once you see that gap clearly, you start noticing it everywhere else too. Most people picture the Colossus the same way, and that picture is wrong in a very specific way. A giant man, legs spread across the harbor, ships passing between his feet like toys. It looks insane. It looks dominant. It looks unbeatable. Which is exactly why people keep believing it. The problem is that this image was invented long after the statue was already gone, by people who had never seen it and did not understand ancient engineering. No ancient source describes this stance. No modern engineer believes it could stand for more than seconds. The myth survives because it satisfies a craving for spectacle, not because it reflects reality. And that matters, because when we exaggerate the statue, we also exaggerate the mystery of its collapse. The truth is simpler, sharper, and more revealing. To understand why the Colossus was built the way it was, you have to understand Rhodes itself. This was not a weak city trying to compensate. Rhodes was rich, strategic, and globally connected by ancient standards. Its harbors controlled trade routes between the Aegean and the Eastern Mediterranean. Its ships were everywhere. But power creates visibility, and visibility attracts pressure. When Rhodes refused to bow to Macedonian dominance, it didn't get diplomacy, it got siege. And when a city survives something that should have crushed it, survival stops feeling random. It starts feeling earned. That emotional shift is subtle, but it is the seed from which monuments grow. The siege led by Demetrius Poliorcetes was not a small event. It was a full-scale demonstration of ancient military power, complete with massive siege towers and experimental weapons. Rhodes endured it for an entire year. When Demetrius withdrew, he left behind not just abandoned machinery, but a psychological vacuum. Rhodes had survived the impossible. And once you survive the impossible, the next move is almost always overconfidence. The city didn't just want to remember the victory, it wanted the world to never forget it. That desire turns quickly into scale, because scale feels like certainty. This is why the statue had to be more than decorative. It couldn't depict a general or a ruler, because human figures imply limits. The Colossus depicted Helios, the sun god, protector of Rhodes and symbol of cosmic order. This was not subtle. By casting Helios in bronze, the city was saying that its survival aligned with the structure of reality itself. But here's the trap. Once confidence is tied to divinity, doubt becomes dangerous. If the statue stands, belief hardens. If it falls, the question isn't what went wrong. It's what did we misunderstand? Ancient sources consistently describe the Colossus as standing about 70 cubits tall, which translates to roughly 110 feet. That number is important because it's realistic. It doesn't require fantasy to be impressive. At that height, the statue towered over buildings, walls, and ships. It was visible far out at sea. But it also sat directly at the edge of what ancient materials could safely support. The Colossus was not impossibly tall. It was precariously tall. That distinction explains why everything that follows feels inevitable rather than mysterious. The harbor-straddling myth survived because it made the Colossus feel superhuman. But reality was less theatrical and more dangerous. The statue stood beside the harbor, not over it, anchored to solid ground. Anything else would have blocked trade for years and guaranteed structural failure. Ancient engineers understood enough physics to avoid obvious suicide. The myth only appeared after the physical evidence disappeared, when imagination no longer had to compete with reality. And when imagination takes over, scale always grows. Building the Colossus required inventing solutions on the fly. There was no precedent for a statue this tall. Engineers used an iron framework, attached bronze plates to the exterior, and filled the interior with stone to add weight and stability. Earth ramps surrounded the statue as it rose, allowing access while hiding weaknesses. Each stage depended on the last being good enough. Mistakes could not be corrected later. Once complete, the structure was locked in. The Colossus was not a refined system, it was a frozen experiment. From the outside, the Colossus looked indestructible. Bronze feels permanent. Mass feels reassuring. But strength isn't about how something looks, it's about how force moves through it. The Colossus concentrated enormous stress through its legs, especially at the knees. Bronze resists compression well but performs poorly under bending stress. Iron helps, but only when loads are evenly distributed. In the Colossus, they weren't. The statue stood because it hadn't yet been challenged by sudden lateral movement. That challenge arrived in 226 BCE. The earthquake didn't need to be massive. It only needed to be abrupt. The ground shifted, the statue swayed, and stress concentrated exactly where engineers would now expect it to. Ancient accounts describe the Colossus snapping at the knees, which aligns perfectly with modern structural analysis. It did not erode slowly. It failed instantly. 12 years of construction ended in seconds. That speed matters, because it tells us the statue wasn't aging, it was waiting. The collapse wasn't just physical. It was psychological. This statue embodied divine approval, civic identity, and technological confidence all at once. When it fell, it forced an uncomfortable question. Was the statue flawed, or was the belief behind it flawed? In a culture where disasters carried meaning, rebuilding was no longer just an engineering decision. It was a theological gamble. Fixing the statue meant admitting uncertainty, and uncertainty was more dangerous than ruins. Oracles reportedly warned against rebuilding the Colossus, and whether that warning was sincere or convenient, it stopped action completely. Leaving the statue fallen avoided reopening doubt. The ruins became a frozen compromise between pride and caution. Rhodes preserved the memory of victory without repeating the risk that followed it. In doing so, the city accidentally created something more powerful than the original statue, a permanent reminder that confidence has limits. For centuries, travelers visited Rhodes not to see a standing god, but a broken one. They described fingers larger than men and fragments too heavy to move. The Colossus became famous not for its height, but for its scale relative to human vulnerability. In its broken state, the statue became relatable. It taught something the intact version never could: ambition leaves fingerprints even after it fails. When the physical remains were eventually removed and sold as scrap centuries later, the Colossus disappeared completely. But absence didn't shrink the legend, it inflated it. Without evidence, imagination filled the gaps. Heights increased. Stances widened. The statue became superhuman. This is how myths grow. Uncertainty invites projection. The less we can verify, the more confidently we exaggerate. Modern megastructures exist because early experiments like this failed. The Colossus revealed where stress concentrates, why redundancy matters, and how scale amplifies weakness. Flexible joints, seismic dampers, and reinforced cores are responses to lessons learned the hard way. The statue didn't end ambition. It disciplined it. Failure became data. The Colossus leaves behind a reusable mental model. When success arrives faster than understanding, confidence becomes dangerous. Rhodes survived a siege and assumed permanence. The statue was built on that assumption. Collapse corrected it. This pattern repeats endlessly, in technology, politics, finance, and culture. That's why the Colossus isn't just ancient history. It's a loop we keep re-entering. This kind of thinking, questioning certainty instead of repeating legends, is exactly what History of Questions exists for. Not to destroy myths for fun, but to understand why people build them in the first place. Because once you understand why confidence forms, you can predict where it breaks. The Colossus still matters because it failed honestly. It didn't collapse quietly or fade away. It broke in public, without excuses, and forced people to rethink what they believed about scale, permanence, and divine favor. Some failures age better than successes, because they continue teaching long after success stops asking questions. So how tall was the Colossus of Rhodes really? About 110 feet. And why did it collapse so quickly? Because it was built at the edge of knowledge, in a land that moved beneath it, by people bold enough to try before the rules were written. The statue wasn't weak. It was early. And being early is often indistinguishable from being wrong, until later generations learn from it. Some monuments stand for thousands of years and disappear from memory. Others stand briefly, fall hard, and echo forever. The Colossus belongs to the second kind. And if you're someone who values ideas that survive pressure instead of trends, History of Questions is for people who want to keep asking why certainty fails. If that kind of thinking matters to you, subscribe.